You may not know this, but more than 200 years ago, a bunch of dudes and a few other dudettes, chicks, whatever you want to call them, decided to make a venture to a foreign place and start something new. And they began sharing some territory with people who were already there and people who came from other places, and they all came together, and they decided that given all of the ways that things were done around the world, that the best way to get a bunch of people to get along and agree with each other after the fighting was over and everybody decided we can coexist together was to actually take individual responsibility for what they were doing and to have a representative form of government that everyone who was a part of what was going on would have some voice in what was going on, but it wouldn't just be the public and the day that led the decisions. It would be what we would call a representative form of representation or government, specifically a representative republic. You may have heard, in fact, if you've listened to news clips, you've probably heard a gazillion times in the last 5 years, this is not good for our democracy. This is not good for our democracy. This is not good for our democracy. We don't live in a democracy! Sorry. It gets under my skin. Because the reason they keep repeating it is so that you will believe it. And it's not true. It's simply not true. And today I'm going to talk about an incident that happened. I shared it on Facebook earlier in West Covina, California, and I'm going to demonstrate to you why you're glad we don't live in a democracy and why the concept of democracy, all on its own, is dangerous to the representative form of republic that we live in right now. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and it may seem odd from a leadership standpoint to be talking about this, but I want you to kind of open up your mind for a moment and realize just how narrowly you have been driven through the doctrine of rhetoric. Leaders are supposed to be really good at communication. In fact, one of my most prominent mentors in my life is John Maxwell. And his book, Everyone Communicates, But Few Connect, is a powerful demonstration of just how good leadership requires good communication. But understand that there are people out there who are great communicators, very gifted in persuasion and influence, who have their own agenda at hand, and their desire is not necessarily to lead you in the way that's best for you, but to lead you in the way that's best for them. That's called manipulation or control or coercion. And the idea of repeating an idea over and 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 over again until you either take it up as common language, even if it's not true, or you believe it to be true, even when it's not true, or you get so resistant to the idea that you rebel against it or repel the notion because you've heard the word so many times. Now, there are things that become buzzwords, they become viral words, they become cliche. And those words are generally easy to dismiss because, you know, they're recognizable. Some become slang or slur, or they get thrown into categories like ebonics or hillbillyese or redneckese. There's a whole lot of them words like fixin' to. I grew up in the South. I recognize most of them. But then there are words that are intentionally misnomers. They have a deeper meaning. In fact, I watched a very, very long, probably hour and a half long video a couple of weeks ago from a professor who talked about this word social justice. And in the meaning of the word social justice, he went back to the very first time it was used and where it came from. And this African-American professor said, I want you to know that word does not mean what you think it means, and yet you keep using it. And the problem is we keep reinforcing a notion behind an idea that has a lot of depth and a lot of legs and a lot of meaning. And it doesn't mean the connotation that we're using the word now, but it will become a part of our vernacular and people will say it all the time. In fact, you may not know this now, but if you have big investments, go look at your investment score sheet and you will probably see your ESG score on there. ESG is your environmental, social justice, and government score. Social just says social, not social justice, but social justice has a very specific meaning in the way that we treat people all around the world, and whether or not you agree with those ideas is not relevant. It will impact your credit score, and it will impact your ability to buy and sell, and it will impact the way you do business. And that's what happens in a true democracy, where the decisions are not made by you, they're made by the masses, and you don't have any control of them. See, the misnomer is that a lot of people think, when I hear the word democracy, it means that we, the people, get to decide. But what really happens with democracy is that some people come in and then they throw an idea into the crowd. It's like a mental hand grenade, and this social mental hand grenade causes a mob-style reaction, and then the mob-style reaction gets emotionally riled up, and for the day, for the hour, for the week, maybe a few months, everyone charges along like a herd of wild animals in the direction of this grenade, either from it or toward it. And then they realize that wasn't such a good idea, and they try to change course. But by then, new policies are already enacted. The world has already changed based on that reaction. And here's what you need to know. The genius who threw the grenade knew that would be the outcome, and that is why they love the word democracy. Because it literally is about throwing hand grenades, lobbing them into certain places, mental, political, social, financial hand grenades into certain places to steer the crowd of the mob to go any direction they want to. And the challenge is the crowd doesn't realize it's being manipulated. But the concept of democracy makes us feel like that we as a crowd, we have the voice. We can make this be what we want it to be. We can change the world. And it doesn't work like that. Democracies get manipulated by tyrants. Over and over and over again. A representative republic, on the other hand, says, we're going to pick the best and the brightest among us who represent us the best, and we're going to send them to make decisions on our behalf. Now, that is the key of a good representative republic. They make decisions on our behalf. They're there. They are there. Get your contractions right. THEY''RE. THERE, not for their THEIR benefit, but for ours. They're there, not for their benefit, but for our benefit. Representative republic does not mean these people go to DC or to the state capitol to make themselves wealthy. If you have not caught on yet, ask yourself the question, how does anybody, any of them, there's over 700 people at the Washington, D.C. Capitol that are supposed to be representing people from all over America who get a salary somewhere between $150,000 and $400,000, and they're multi-millionaires. But they've never had another job. They don't own any other business besides what they've done since they got in the government. That should concern you, because they're there for their benefit and not yours, and that is a problem. That means they're not representing the republic that they're supposed to be speaking on behalf of, and yet we still do not live in a democracy. We're being run like one. We're being run by mob mentality. So let me give you the story that I watched this morning on Facebook. I shared it. Scroll down from this video, you'll see it. It's a gentleman who apparently, according to his own word, I can't verify his word that he's a veteran, but he did say he was a veteran. He's in a Walgreens store in West Covina, California, and he's accosted by a couple of police officers who tell him he needs to leave the store because he's been accused of stealing. Well, he's a little bit miffed about it. He tries to explain that he wasn't stealing, does everything that he can to justify himself. Still, they escort him out the store and say, you're not welcome to shop here anymore. He's like, what do you mean anymore? This is the first time I've ever been in the store. I'm not from this part of town. I'm literally just passing through. And they said, well, you were accused of stealing at the store next door. And when they called the police, they also called this store. And then this store called the police and said that the person who was stealing next door was now stealing in their store. And so the police have responded, and that's us, and we're here, and you need to leave. He's like, well, search me and tell me what I've stolen. And you can watch the whole video unfold, but here's the bottom line of it. The man has the audacity to walk back into the first store where he's accused of stealing, to confront the person who accused him of stealing and called the police. With the 2 police officers in tow, only feet behind him, the woman says, you ready for this? That's not the guy that was stealing in our store. So he turns to the police and he says, okay, am I free to go now? And they said, well, you're free to go. You just can't go back in that store. He's like, I've been accused, but not guilty of a crime. The person, see, under our representative form of republic, we actually have the opportunity to face our accusers. And we are innocent until proven guilty, not guilty until proven innocent. This man did his own investigation. He confronted his accuser. His accuser, in front of law enforcement, said, sorry, that's not the guy. He goes back to the other store with that open confession, that's not the guy. He didn't steal anything. That's not even the guy I'm accusing of stealing anything. He doesn't look anything like the description I reported to 911. Goes back to the other store, confronts the store manager there, and she asks him for an apology for distressing her, rather than apologizing to him for having him towed out of the store almost in cuffs. Now, if he had reacted in a negative way, the chances that he would have been violently accosted by the police, thrown in handcuffs, put in the back of the car for resisting arrest or for criminal trespass or God knows what, instead of keeping his head about him, he could have had a really bad day over a false accusation that spread from one place to another falsely. My friends, it's happening over face masks now. If you don't don your mask in a place where they're not required by law, but the business has chosen to, you can be arrested, dragged out the door. See, when you take a mental, emotional, financial, health risk hand grenade and you lob it into the mass public, with half of the explanations, even today, 2 days ago, our president said, I would like every state to lift the mask mandate releases and put everybody back under mask mandate. We need to have them in the entire country. That was our president. The same week, the CDC said, we're seeing a great impact from the virus vaccinations, and so we can probably move on to new protocol. And in the same week, Dr. Fauci said, no, this is not working. We're about to see the 4th worst rollout we've ever seen. Which science are you going to trust? Who is it that you're going to believe? But here's what we do know. When you lob a hand grenade into a mass of people, they change direction. And emotionally, financially, politically, they change direction. That's a democracy. When the people, as a mass, make decisions, that's a democracy. We don't live in a democracy. But you can make the world act like one, where basically everything runs by mob rule. Whatever you've had, if they want it, they take it. If they don't like the way you do things, they make you stop. But they do it by mass rule. If one person in one store reports you incorrectly and another person in another store agrees with that, with no evidence whatsoever, not only are you potentially found guilty, but you will be treated as if you're guilty until you can prove your innocence. And you may not get that chance. You may not get your day in court. You may get your confrontation with law enforcement, who's already having a bad day and think this whole thing is ridiculous. Then all they did was ask you to leave the store and you should have complied. And now you got a fist fight. Now you got handcuffs. Now you got jail time. Now your whole life is jacked up because one person in one store wants to play the telephone game. Remember that old game from elementary school where you pass a message around the table and by the time it gets to 4th or 5th person, it doesn't even sound like the first person said? And see, that's what democracy looks like. We lose control of that. That's why we have a representative republic. Sadly, we're not being represented the way that we should be. We need different people in Congress who haven't been there 50 plus years making themselves wealthy. We need people who serve a term and then they go back to farming, or they serve a term and they go back to running their insurance business, or they serve a term and they go back to the business that they've built their family around. And they figure out how to fund themselves. They don't live perpetually as professional politicians, because that is a nightmare, and that is not a representative republic. It's a ruling class. Here's a phrase you should make yourself familiar with. Take some time to look it up. It's called the divine right of kings. And when the ruling class of any government, of any form of government, anywhere on the planet, decide to claim for themselves the divine right of kings, everyone else becomes a serf. And again, if that's not what they taught you in history class because they were really busy teaching you that white people are the worst humans on earth and they should all be destroyed, you should probably go back and read some other books. And I'm not saying white people haven't done bad things, but I am saying that's not the only important thing you need to know. There are other important things you need to know about finance, about business, about leadership, about communication skills, and about politics and ways of ruling worlds. Because what you're seeing right now is a whole lot of deception to manipulate the world into compliance under one ruling class that will rule globally. And if you think I'm kidding, you haven't done your homework. Not only your history homework, but your current affairs homework. You need to go rip some stuff from the headlines over about 10 weeks and compare them and see the progression. John Kerry himself said, we will. This was 3 weeks ago at the World Economic Forum in Davos. John Kerry, secretary to President Biden, said we will see social global transformation of our economies, our societies, and our forms of government. And it's going to come harder and faster than anyone could have predicted. Those are the words of John Kerry. Look them up if you think I'm crazy. We do not live in a democracy. We live in a representative republic that is not currently being represented well. Yeah, this has been a long message, and this doesn't sound like my normal leadership stuff. I've got a bit of a burr in my saddle. But this very message is exactly why our founding fathers said, we need to make sure that we have a Bill of Rights. We need to make sure that people are innocent until proven guilty. We need to make sure that people have the right of their own personhood to not be subject to illegal search and seizure. We need to make sure they have the right to defend themselves. Not from the deer, and not only from criminals, but also from a government gone wild. Yeah, it's in there. Look it up. And if you think I'm crazy, you're not awake. When it comes to leadership, our responsibility as leaders does not stop at our front door. It doesn't stop at the door of our business or in the conference room. It doesn't stop in the influence that we have in those that we employ or those that we feed every day. No, our responsibility as leaders is to put our input into the world. And I challenge you, if you disagree with me, speak up. If you think I'm crazy, challenge me. We'll go look at it together. Perhaps you'll convince me that I'm wrong. And I would be delighted to correct or to apologize. I want the conversation to happen more than I want anything else, because I don't like seeing people guided by hand grenades lobbed by people who have an agenda. And that's what I've seen in the last 2 years. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.